Hi, I'm Milena. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to a beginner's guide to the author Virginia Woolf. Today I will give you some information on Virginia Woolf. We'll do a little bit of a bio. We'll talk a little bit about her writing style and about the other writers and her inspiration. And of course I will help you pick your next Virginia Woolf read, or maybe your very first Virginia Woolf read. I've designed a little decision tree that will also be on my Instagram, which I will link down below, which you can use to pick your next Virginia Woolf. But first, if Virginia Woolf is quite a new author to you, let's just dive in with who is Virginia Woolf? Born Virginia Stephen in 1882 in London, her parents were the ideal Victorians. Her father was a journalist and her mother became a nurse later in life. She grew up with many siblings as her parents had both been married before. She was closest to her sister Vanessa, later Vanessa Bell, who was a painter. Together with Vanessa, she was part of the Bloomsbury Group, a group of artists and writers. She married Leonard Woolf in 1912. They set up a small publishing house together, the Hogarth Press. All of Virginia Woolf's novels were published by them. In total, she wrote 9 novels, multiple short stories and a big bundle of essays called The Common Reader. Her most famous essay is called A Room of One's Own, a feminist manifesto for women in fiction. She died in 1941 by suicide as her mental illness had become unbearable at that point. So that is a little overview of Virginia Woolf's writing, and in especially her essay A Room of One's Own, she really gets into her personal beliefs when it comes to feminism, writing, and just the things that she has learned in her life. But most of her essays are critical essays on other people's writings. Virginia Woolf was an author who was part of the Bloomsbury Group that also had writers like Ian Forster, other literary critics and artists. Virginia Woolf's novels can be classified as modernism. If you know a little bit about art, then you know that the modernists were very experimental and did very strange things that we wouldn't necessarily classify as beautiful, but that were really important for everything that happened during the 20th century. Same can be said for modernist writers. It is described as self-conscious break with traditional ways of writing in both poetry and prose. Virginia Woolf's writing is not incredibly approachable. It is a bit difficult because of that modernist experimental tone within her writing. Within themes you can see also philosophers. It is based on science and new thinking, especially by Nietzsche and Freud, who talked about the subjective human experience of reality. Modernism really started with a utopian idealism, but later, especially after the First World War, you see a much darker side of that humanity being explored. Virginia Woolf was a pacifist herself, but the First World War, and especially the effects of the war, is very present in her writing. That subjective human experience of reality is seen in different literary devices that the modernists used, and I will of course only talk about the things that Virginia Woolf really used, but I think she is quite a classic example of a modernist writer. One of the things that is most often identified with Virginia Woolf is stream of consciousness. I can try to explain to you what that is, but the internet can do a better job, so let's learn together the official definition, or an elaborate definition of stream of consciousness. Stream of consciousness is a narrative style that tries to capture a character's thought to process in a realistic way. It's an interior monologue, but it's also more than that. Because it's mimicking the non-linear way our brain works, stream of consciousness narration includes a lot of free association, looping repetitions, sensory observations, and strange or even non-existent punctuation and syntax, all of which help us to better understand the character's psychological state and worldview. It's meant to feel like you have dipped into the stream of the character's consciousness, or like you're a fly on the wall of their mind. Stream of consciousness sounds really complicated. I personally really enjoy the style of writing, and I think it does help if you feel a little bit attracted towards it before you start reading Virginia Woolf, because almost all of her novels are really heavy on the stream of consciousness. The other things that the modernists did was a lot of interior monologue, which of course is basically a part of stream of consciousness, but also multiple points of views. And I think that is the part where Virginia Woolf's writing is actually quite difficult, because some authors are very kind to their readers and they give you a name of the character before they switch perspectives. Virginia Woolf very much does not do that, especially in Mrs. Dalloway. I will talk about the book specifically in a little bit, as a lot of point of view switches. But it is very important for Virginia Woolf's stream of consciousness. Virginia Woolf was a great reader as well, especially when she was younger. She read a lot of Jane Austen and George Eliot, and she admired them throughout her entire life. You can also see that in the essays that she wrote about their works. Contemporaries of hers who also were modernists was James Joyce, who of course wrote Ulysses. Ulysses is a book that Virginia Woolf was reading while she was herself writing Mrs. Dalloway. Poetry of T.S. Eliot was also a big inspiration for Woolf. So Virginia Woolf herself herself, as I've mentioned before, wrote essays, short stories and novels. I'm only going to talk about her major essay and her novels when we're going to talk about where to start. I invite you to join along on my decision tree that I made to pick your very next Virginia Woolf, and every time we come on a novel or an essay I will tell you very shortly what it is about. The first question is, have you read Virginia Woolf before? Let's say you haven't, you go to no. Do you like essays? If you do, I would recommend you read A Room of One's Own. I have recently uploaded an analysis and a review of that book, but A Room of One's Own is a 100-page essay written by Virginia Woolf about the question, what is women in fiction? She uses both essay writing and fiction writing to try and answer that question. It is one of her more approachable writings. It can be a little bit of a slow read, so definitely take your time with this one. But this essay is a perfect way to kind of get a feel of Virginia Woolf's writing and to see if you would like a novel that is written in the same style. If you do not like essays, then I would recommend you read Mrs. Dalloway. Mrs. Dalloway is one of Virginia Woolf's shortest and, in my opinion, best novels. It's about Clarissa Dalloway, who decides to throw a dinner party. She is a woman of quite high standing, her husband is a politician, and she invites a lot of people. We follow Clarissa and a lot of other people throughout the day that the party is being organized and being held. So the novel is set over one day, but the themes and the characters explored are ginormous. Alright, and then for the people who have read Virginia Woolf before, the first question is, was it A Room of One's Own? I think a lot of people have read A Room of One's Own and now want to read a novel. That is at least a lot of questions that I get from people that have said, I've read A Room of One's Own, what should I read next? But in case you have read something by Virginia Woolf and it was not A Room of One's Own, so no, then my question is again, do you like essays? If your answer is yes, then it would be read A Room of One's Own. If your answer is no, then my question is, have you read Mrs. Dalloway? If your answer is no, then of course read Mrs. Dalloway. But if you have read Mrs. Dalloway, then my question is, what is most important to you? As you can see, I've only used Virginia Woolf's major works in this question tree, mainly because I think if you are going to read beyond these major works, then I think you kind of know what is next for you. If characters is most important to you, then I want to recommend my favorite novel by Virginia Woolf, which is To the Lighthouse. This is about the Ramsey family who live together in a home, and from their home you can see a lighthouse, and the children are constantly asking their father to take them to the lighthouse, but the father always delays this. We follow this family and the guests that stay at their home. This is again very stream of consciousness, but it really explores the characters. It explores friendship, young love, family and romance. If writing is most important to you, then I would recommend The Waves. The Waves is a novel that Virginia Woolf wrote a little bit later. This is about a group of friends who grow up together. We follow them through multiple decades, as each of them have quite a distinct personality. It's more about the way that Virginia Woolf writes time, writes character, than about the actual people themselves. This novel also really explores the idea of being an individual or being part of a group, and whether or not an individual is really a thing. It's very meta. This book is very meta. If you like really focusing on writing in a book, I would recommend The Waves. If plot is most important to you, then I'm going to recommend Virginia Woolf's strangest novel, Orlando. This was based on her friend and lover Vita Sackville West, and Orlando is a character who not only lives for 300 years but also miraculously changes sex and gender throughout the novel. During these 300 years, Orlando grows through a lot. They go on a lot of different trips, they meet a lot of different people, and therefore I think the plot is quite exciting because we are constantly in a different place. The core of the novel is a lot about gender and about equality. So if you wanna go to the decision tree again yourself, I will post it on Instagram. My Instagram handle is milena.reads. Because I get quite a lot of questions from people asking what they should read by Virginia Woolf, because apparently it is kind of clear that I enjoy her works. Nothing to do with my entire Virginia Woolf shelf, I am sure. I did ask on Instagram if you have any questions, so I will answer 2 questions right here that I haven't really discussed in the video previously. Someone asked what my first Virginia Woolf was. That was Mrs. Dalloway. I read it as a buddy read. I nominated it as well to read together because I was just really curious about Virginia Woolf. So that was my first Virginia Woolf, and then I read A Room of One's Own and started going chronologically, starting with A Voyage Out. And right now I am at the years. I've just finished that one, so Between the Acts will be my last novel, which is kind of sad. The other question was what a good buddy read would be of Virginia Woolf's works. Surprisingly, I would say To the Lighthouse. I didn't think this was a good one, but then I buddy read it with a book club, and it was one of our most interesting discussions that we ever had. And I think it's because the focus is very much on the characters and on the concept of time. There are 3 chapters into The Lighthouse, and the way that it is divided is very interesting, I think, and there's a lot to talk about how that relates to the characters. And again, there are so many characters and so many different relationships that a lot of people will have a lot of very different opinions. Even though I would say if you want to read a Virginia Woolf novel, start with Mrs. Dalloway, I don't necessarily think that is a great novel to have a discussion on, because it is just that one day and it goes so fast. So yeah, I would say read together To the Lighthouse. And I was very surprised that almost everyone really loved it, because I hear a lot of negative reviews of To the Lighthouse, of people who just don't get along with it. But I think if you have that added element of being able to discuss it with other people, it just hypes up your reading experience. I hope this video was somewhat helpful and you've been able to decide if you want to start reading Virginia Woolf or what book by her you want to read. If you've already made a decision, or if you have more questions about this, then please leave me a comment. For now, I hope that you have a lovely day or evening, and I hope to see you in another video. Doei!